Welcome to the Ecommerce Alley podcast, where we believe that great brands are built on passionate leadership, smart operations, and of course, powerful marketing. I'm your host, Josh Coffey, and today I have a very special guest again, Matt Harward. And now Matt is a serial entrepreneur, but incredibly brilliant mind. In fact, last week we had him on the podcast and we dove deep into algorithmic scaling on Facebook ads. And so today we're gonna dive even deeper than that. So get your notepad. Unless you're in the car, then don't get a notepad. Keep driving and just listen. But Matt, man, I'm so excited we get to speak again 2 weeks in a row.
I know. This makes it easy for me, where it's like, who needs to go on a bunch of podcasts? So I just keep coming back and going on Josh's.
We just have you on once a month, so that way you we're like your recurring one. I love it.
Absolutely.
Well, cool. So real quick, I do want to, for anyone who's just coming in and you haven't listened to maybe the last episode with Matt on algorithmic scaling when it comes to Facebook advertising, first of all, go listen to that, because there's so much within that by the time we got off, Matt and he ended up doing a 30-minute session with me afterwards, diving even deeper, because I was just so hungry for more of this. But if you haven't listened to it, go listen to that. And if you don't know Matt, he has built 2 9-figure companies, several multi-8-figure brands. He's sold companies of Fortune 500 brands. And then he's also, between the different companies, generated, I think he mentioned he stopped tracking after $350 million in sales, spent $54 million on Facebook ads, and obviously beyond that by this time. And I say all that to say, you need to listen up, because they always say success leaves clues. And Matt, you spent way more money than I have on Facebook ads. So I mean, I have my notes here, and I'm excited to dive into this.
It'll be fun.
All right. So last time we talked about a lot of things around Facebook ads, and so what I'd love to do in this is really dive a little bit deeper into some of the weeds, if that's okay.
Yep.
We spoke about, you talked about A/B testing on Facebook ads and how that's like a slow growth model. And what you've learned in just generating hundreds of millions is that you really have to lean into the rapid experimentation, is what I believe you were calling it. In the process with that is, and so by the time we finished, I had all these questions in my mind, like, okay, what's the process? Where do you kind of start? And so if it's okay with you, could you kind of break that down a little bit? Like from a very, very high level, when you talk about rapid experimentation on Facebook ads, like what does that mean to you?
Yeah, and if I could, I'd love to take a kind of a step back and address the A/B testing first. Because whoever it was, I've been in the online marketing game for a really, really long time. Like my origins go all the way back to like Corey Rudel type things, which most people have no idea who that is. But I've been in this for like decades. And I remember when the concept, I don't remember who first started pushing, but this concept of A/B testing came out. It's like, oh, this is magical. This is really cool. And so on the one hand, whoever first introduced that did a great service to marketers by exposing us to that concept. But also whoever did that did us a terrible disservice, because we've all learned testing wrong. And I mean that in a very literal way. We learned a thin slice of what testing should be or could be. And first of all, most marketers apply it incorrectly. But second of all, that concept of A/B testing is not what people think that it is. Most people should not be A/B testing. Not because that's a bad thing to do, but because it's the wrong time to do it in their business. A/B testing, the A/B testing that we're all familiar with, if you're in online marketing, if you don't come from an actual formal technical testing background, how we learned A/B testing, and you test the headline and isolate your variables and do all that stuff. Those are all optimizations. And that means that they should only come into play once you've already got something that's worth optimizing. But in this day and age, especially on Facebook, so Josh, you and I talked a lot about Facebook after the fact last time and during the podcast last time, but especially on Facebook, and let's just say especially on any platform post iOS 14.5. Where now you used to be able to throw something just kind of middle of the road out there, or have what I call multiple implied proofs. I'll say some technical nerdy things. Feel free to like smack me upside the head and say, explain that or shut up. But
but this concept,
yeah, I will. I'll explain that.
Yeah.
But the concept of throwing something out there middle of the road and letting Facebook optimize it up for us. They used to be really good at that. That used to be a viable strategy in the e-commerce world, right? I mean, if you played this game for any longer than about 2 years, you're probably familiar with that. We can throw something okay out there and let Facebook figure out the audience and let Facebook figure out, well, who's this a good message for, and figure out these other things. That, by the way, is an implied proof. An implied proof is, Facebook, I'm going to give you this problem. I'm going to give you this funnel or this product detail page that I'm going to run traffic to with this creative. And there's a lot of stuff I haven't proven yet with that. But I'm going to let you go out and just kind of mathematically do all the math with your algorithm magic and mojo and optimize this for me, right? And that, by and large, it doesn't work anymore. At a minimum, it's way less effective than it was. I would say, from my experience dealing with people who are asking me these kinds of questions, is it largely doesn't work. And so now we've got to go to a more rigorous kind of testing framework. It would help us. It would help most marketers to understand what we're actually doing when we test. And since all that most of us are familiar with is A/B testing, which is kind of the far side of optimization testing, it doesn't do us any good. If we need an acquisition cost of $25 and it's $60 right now, the chances of you optimizing there are very, very, very slim. You're not going to get there by traditional A/B testing. And worse, you used to be able to let Facebook fill in a lot of those gaps, and you can't really do that anymore. So now we have these kind of muddy things with a lot of implied proofs and a lot of unknowns in them that we throw out there, and we expect to optimize into profitability. We expect to optimize into scale. It doesn't work like that. Yep.
I was going to ask, so like, what's an example that you see, a really common example of people doing A/B testing on Facebook ads that you think isn't wise? Like, what's a tangible example of that?
All of it. And by the way, and I say that half laughing, but realistically, I've not met. I'm trying to think if I ever met anybody who does testing properly, and I don't think that I have. Now, I meet people that do it worse than others, but here's a very common example. The first thing is they throw out an entire funnel and a creative, okay? Because they have to have, in order to test anything, this is one of the problems with how most people test. In order to test anything, they have to test everything. On the last podcast, I used the example of golfing, that if the only way that you can improve your golf game is you actually go out and golf 18 rounds and you're trying to improve your driving, you might get 14 tries in your golf round, and you may get a little bit better, but realistically, you're not going to improve much at golf if all you ever do is just play the competitive round, right? And most people, when they're doing Facebook testing, they throw out a funnel that has a lot of implied proofs in it, a lot of things. They assume, well, I think this is what my audience wants. And you think you know your audience, and you may know your audience, by the way, but mathematically, Facebook knows them better. The more that you're cutting them out of these decisions, you're probably worse off for it, even before all the iOS 14.5 stuff. But regardless, they'll throw out a funnel with a lot of assumptions in that funnel. They'll throw out an untested audience on Facebook with an untested creative, and they feel like they have to do this to test anything. They got to be able to go all the way through the sales process, right? Now, they throw it out there. It doesn't work like, everybody puts stuff out there and they think, I nailed this. I love it. I love my funnel. It looks cool. The messaging is right. I got a cool headline on it. And then when it doesn't work, the first thing that happens is there's just like, I don't know what to do. I put all my best ideas in it and it didn't work. And the first thing to understand is this has nothing to do with best ideas. Not tons of people go out of business with great ideas. Tons of people go out of business having great products. And by the way, there are tons of people who have lousy products who are succeeding beyond belief. I like to take those things off the table and let's just talk about what we know and what people do. So they'll have this thing that isn't working. And usually when it's not working, it's not, well, gosh, my margins are, my net margin, let's talk gross margins. That's easier for people. My gross margins are 30% and I want them to be 40%. Most of the time it's, gosh, my gross margin is 4%, and I'm not at scale, which means I'm just going to eat into that, and so I don't have any room to go anywhere. So I can make 4% and sell 12 units a day. It's not viable, right? Even when it's working. So most people kind of get right within that, like, not most people, a lot of people get into that. It's working-ish, but not great. And then they start doing this optimization testing, and they'll change. Well, let me try this word in my headline. Let me try. What if it's an exciting new offer instead of a cool new offer? Not a great example, but this is what people tell them to do. Come up with a different headline and change one word. Or if you change the whole headline, maybe that's like you're being wild. Change the whole headline and do this. But at best, you're just statistically, you're not likely going to get, in the case I just gave, let's say that you're at 5% gross margin and you really need to be at 30 or 40% gross margin. That means that you've got to come up with 5%. You've got to come up with somewhere in the neighborhood of an 800% improvement in what you're doing. You're not going to optimize your way there. Just think about it mathematically. It doesn't work like that. And so what you really end up doing, most people when they're testing, is they just cross their fingers. And because they've got to test really deep, meaning all the way to conversions, testing becomes very slow because statistically, and I don't want people's eyes to roll back in the back of their head, but this is to make it work, you've got to run enough traffic, enough volume to statistically get to a reasonable number, a number that's meaningful at the end, which means that in production, a full top to bottom test, a real test, even if you're only testing two variables, and again, most people screw this up, but even a clean test with just two variables, if you're not spending, generally speaking, this obviously depends on price points and a lot of other things here, but typically it's going to cost $2,000 to $5,000 to do a real test at that top to bottom funnel thing. And when you're only trying to change one variable at a time, man, you're really, really, really hoping that you stumble across a low probability statistic with, but in something where you've got a high probability methodology, meaning you need high probabilities feeding into it, but I don't know how to explain that part of it. I don't know how much sense that makes, but you get this disconnect. You have something that inherently is going to require time and money and resources to test, and which means you can't get through it fast. So when most people get through it fast, they're cheating and they're not actually running good tests, and they still suck at it. But the reality is, most people, even when they do it right, they're just way too. You're not ready for an optimization yet. Testing is fundamentally there are two sides to testing. You get into, on the one side, you have pure exploration. Exploration has no optimization component to it. It's just about let's explore, let's discover. So internally, the technical term for it is it's exploration against exploitation. Those are the two sides of testing. And we call it discovery and optimization internally for me, but I'll use those interchangeably. But exploration is how much ground can we cover? What is there? What paths and what routes and what different things are there out there that we could test? And usually early on in a business, when you don't know your audience yet, you maybe don't know your product yet, you're new in business, or there's a big change like the iOS change, you introduce more unknowns into your business. And now suddenly you should mathematically be more inclined to exploration as opposed to exploitation. Exploitation is where you get to a point where it's like, I have something viable. I have something that I can run it at a profit. I can run an acceptable profit margin. I've got it somewhat at scale. And now I want to get incrementally better at it. So if I really want a $35 customer acquisition cost and I'm at $38, I can optimize to $35. But if I need 35 and I'm at 50, the chances of me optimizing there are very low. And by the way, it's also going to be very time consuming and very expensive. I'm likely going to run out of time or money or some other resource before I can optimize down to where I want to be. And so one of the changes that really happened with iOS 14.5, it's always been there, but you could kind of get away without doing this properly before, was you could throw something out there that's in this no man's land of, it's not really exploration, but it's not really exploitation, and Facebook could exploit it. They can't do that anymore. So now when you throw something like that out there, Facebook just gets like, nah, we don't know what to do with this. You're going to lose money on this. And it's very frustrating for marketers. And then marketers talk about, you've got to climb this, what I call you've got to go high threshold, meaning you need now high impact creatives. You need a well converting funnel or a great VSL or whatever it might be. And while that is fundamentally true, It's how do you get there that's the problem. If we just knew, oh, okay, gosh, I've been lazy. Let me just throw this high quality creative out there and that'll work. It doesn't work that way. You'll throw a high quality creative out and say, dang it, that one didn't work either. And then you throw out another one. Dang it, that one didn't work either. And in the meantime, if you've got video production costs and you've got, a funnel designer and these other things, it's just chewing up time and resources as you test these things. So the more reliable way to get there, the more reliable way to get into that optimization zone, which generally, it used to be, a rule of thumb was about 30%. If you were within 30%, you could start optimizing. But you had to be within 30% on both scale and on your cost, because if it was on cost.
I was going to say, what do you mean by 30%?
So let's say that ultimately in my business, I have projected that I want to be able to sell 1,000 units a day at a gross margin of 30%. Okay, whatever my units cost. Let's just use a bunch of round numbers here. Let's say I have a $100 unit that I've allocated a third to product to manufacturing and delivery, and a third of it to marketing, and then a third of it's going to be gross profit. Now, so I'm not going to take into account rent and labor and these other things, because that's the difference between gross and net. So let's just talk gross, right? Nice round numbers: a third, a third, a third. And so that means that on a $100 product, I need to have my acquisition costs need to be about $33. Let's say $35 is an acceptable number for me to acquire a customer. Does that make sense to you so far?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I also want to sell 1,000 of them a day. So it doesn't help me a lot. Let's say that I finally, at a low volume, I'm selling these things, and while I'm testing, I'm selling 15, 20 of them a day, but I finally get to where, all right, I got a $40 acquisition cost now. And I think that I can start optimizing, but I can't yet, because I'm not within the optimization range for my scale number. Because for that, I could only start optimizing once I'm selling about 700 a day. Then I can optimize up. So if I start that optimization process too soon, and I see this all the time, people get profitable, and then they look at me and they're like, gosh, how do you scale so big? They're trying to scale off of a number. They're trying to optimize their scale, but they don't have a number that gives them enough wiggle room they're not in that optimization range yet. I don't know if I've explained that well, but both those things have to be true. You've got to get close enough with both your acquisition costs and your scale number in order to optimize into that, in order to really take advantage of the just pure scale of, now I'm just going to spend more and tweak and start A/B split testing headlines and finding these little 1%, 2% tweaks. People talk about, if you get 1% better every day, then it's a path to guaranteed success, which is fundamentally true. The problem is A/B testing won't get you there, because you can't run a full test in 24 hours, especially if it's a top to bottom test. You're talking about multiple days, which means you only get an opportunity to get that 1% better about every 4 or 5 days. And in that time frame, guys like me have just absolutely lapped you, because I was getting in enough tests to do that every single day. Does that make sense? So when I talk about you want to get both sides. And then, by the way, there's a third component to this, and I don't mean to overcomplicate this. It's just that when you want to go big scale, when you want to go 9-figure scale, now you get within range. You've got your cost side of things, you've got your scale side of things, or your sales volume side of things, and now you optimize also the algorithmic distribution side of things, which is, where is Facebook going to rank your ad, and how much distribution they're going to get you, because that's a huge component to people that they don't, there's no metric that says on Facebook you're in our 12th position for the average person. You don't ever see how much more scale is there. You think you do, because they'll show you've got an audience size of 2 million people, and you think in those terms, but you don't ever get distribution to those 2 million people, right? Unless you also optimize that. So to really go big with it, you get all three of those things going at once, but it requires, you cannot mathematically optimize your way there. You cannot use traditional A/B testing mechanics to get there on those things. It just doesn't, it mathematically doesn't work out.
So then what's your path with with rapid experimentation? Like what's the overview and like what are the steps to start leaning into that?
So I go all the way to the other side of it, which is I'm generally going to lean more into exploration than exploitation. And what that means is I want to throw out as much, I want to really lower the threshold, meaning I'm trying to specifically run tests that are not going to require, they're not going to require a high threshold in terms of spend, in terms of labor, in terms of skill. What else would go into that? In terms of time, I'm specifically looking to test things that I can go very rapidly on. And that means I've got to apply some automations and some other things too, because I can get down to where I could think about a headline in an ad where in theory, you can test a lot of those quickly, but not if every time you set up a creative, you literally have a human being that has to go in and set up that ad creative in Facebook. And there's some minimum threshold of every one of these takes me 20 minutes just to do the data entry side of it, right? Now you give somebody a list of 100 of those things, which probably wouldn't take that long to come up with, but because you've got this 20-minute minimum threshold on it, you can't test at the volume that you need to. So I'm constantly trying to drive down what are my thresholds to run a test. But I'm also constantly trying to, again, I'm going to use the example that I did in our last podcast, and that was I'm a golfer. And if the only reps I ever get in are I go out to the course and I golf 18 holes, that's a holistic test. There's not a lot that I can play with there. But I can I could stand up right here while I'm having this podcast and I can experiment with different grips on my club of, am I doing this? How am I rotating my knuckles around? And I can literally run 100 experiments while we're talking on a podcast on my grip. How does this feel? What's going to happen is my wrist break. And you don't have to understand the technicalities of golf just to understand that by disconnecting from the round of golf, I open up the testing possibilities exponentially. There's so many things now that I can test. How am I standing relative to the ball? Where's my tee placement relative to my feet? How's my grip? As I come back, and again, I don't want, this isn't about golf, but my swing plane, do I have a shallow or a steep swing plane? There's all of these things that are actually what create a successful golf game, but they're just these little micro things. So part of what we're doing when we go through rapid experimentation is we try and break those things. That's what we call a naked test. And so a naked test is something where we're going to take, let's say, I'll give you two really good examples of this that I use when I'm talking to people and trying to teach them this concept. So one of them is what we call a naked message, and the other one is what we call a naked offer. So the naked message is going to be, because when we throw out a typical ad creative, let's use Facebook as an example because we both know it and probably everybody listening does as well. You throw out a Facebook ad, you've got a visual creative portion of it, you have the body copy, you've got the headline or the title, and then the subhead. You have the name of the page. You've got whether it's a learn more or download now or shop now. You've got your call to action on it. You've got a handful of elements on there, right? And most people are trying in every aspect of that to maximize their conversions, right? That makes sense. That's logical that you want the best image that you can have or the best video that you can have. Let's just say the best visual creative that you can have, the best copy. But here's the problem with that. When it doesn't work, even when it works, by the way, when it works, you don't know which components of that are driving your conversions. You can't trust the yes that you get from it. But even worse, you can't trust the no that you get from it. Because then when it doesn't work, usually people are like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Or they're saying, gosh, but I really like this image. This image is just so cool. And they assume that image is a good image, and so they'll play with their copy, which may be accurate, but we don't know that. So we do this really weird testing, and it's going to sound just completely foreign because it's unprofitable testing. It's testing that we know from the get-go that I am not. This comes back to I'm not trying to optimize for my scale or for my profits yet. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not asking Facebook to prove 14 different variables for me. I'm trying to make sure that when I give them something that I can say, I know this to be true. I know this message works. I know this visual creative works. I know this headline works. So in message testing, in a naked message, what we'll do is we will throw out usually just like a very simple colored ad. So meaning color, just it's still a graphic, but it'll just be one or two colors, very simple. And then we put a core piece of our messaging on there. So if I were to do, what's something that what's a product that you use in your life?
Coffee.
Small
batch
great.
artisan roasted coffee.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so great. The small batch artisan roasted coffee. So I would take some component of that. All right. So let's say the small batch part of it, and I would just put a message out there that is, is your coffee, is your coffee. Now I don't know enough about coffee.
It's hard when you're thrown on the spot. I totally get that.
So again, hopefully this will make sense once we actually get a good example of this. Is your coffee?
Stale.
Yeah, how stale? Okay. How stale is your coffee from your supermarket coffee, or something along those lines? Right now, this isn't really important. Here, by the way, one of the things that we've gone to with this is when I talk about lowering the threshold, I'm trying to come up with a good example here. This is part of the problem with how most people test. Most people, the threshold is so high for their test, especially when they're doing a top to bottom test, they can't afford to waste cycles. You can't afford to throw something out there that even is like, oh, that's too ordinary, or I don't know if that's going to win or not. And when you know that it's going to take time and effort and money, you'll do what I'm doing right now. I don't know if that's, I don't know, no, that's not good enough. And they try and come up with really good stuff. And again, if really good stuff worked, way more people would be successful. The fact of the matter is we don't know. I'm really good at this, and I don't know what's going to work. So part of the driving the threshold down is that in theory, I can come up with, when you mention coffee, I should be able to come up with, does the color of your coffee bean matter? Do you have, does Juan Valdez roast your coffee? Whatever. I mean, I should be able to come up with 30 of those things really easy, right? The reason why I struggle with it is when you put me on the spot is I'm trying to come up with a good example.
A really good one, yeah.
And that slows people down because as a marketer, we should all be familiar with that. Oh, what's a good headline though? And again, the reality is I don't know. And more importantly, the number of times I've been surprised by, gosh, that was a totally ordinary headline that won that split, right? So I want to drive the threshold way down. But now, going back to the naked message, let's just say that it is, what was the pick date of the coffee from your local store? All that I'm looking for is that a message? And I might run, by the way, a dozen variations of that at a time. And all that I'm looking for in that is, given all these messages and taking out, there are a couple of important parts here, taking out all of the conversion-oriented things that I'm going to do, like, ooh, I know I should use this word, and I should use future pacing, and I should, hit on the pain point, whatever. Strip all that away. What's the naked message? What's the thing that if your audience doesn't care about this thing, you can talk fancy to them all you want. You can have cool graphics all you want. If they are not willing to have this naked conversation about how stale their coffee is from the supermarket, they're probably not going to care about all the extra visuals that you put on that. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I do have a question though. So when you're running that, so we have the naked message test. You might do a colored ad from a creative. You might have your messaging on that. So does that mean you're like removing the button, removing links? Like, are you removing everything else from that? I'm
not necessarily removing everything else, but I am removing the other conversion elements, the influence stuff that might go in there. So for example, on the coffee, the headline that you have, so down underneath the visual creative, the headline where normally you're going to try and apply some cool, maybe you're going to have a scarcity element or something along those lines. In this case, I'm just going to have, how did you describe that? It's like artisanal, whatever.
Small batch artisan roasted coffee.
Okay, so that might be my headline. And I just leave that. It's a catchy headline. It's catchy enough, but I'm specifically not trying to make that influential. I do take off body text. I take off subheads. I will sometimes take off the call to action, but I'll often leave the call to action, but I won't vary those, and I'm not trying to optimize for those.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to throw too much stuff into one proof. Anybody who took, just go back to like high school math, and when algebra, when they first started introducing like letters, and it's like, oh, letters in math, what the heck? When you got to solve for one variable, even though initially it's like, okay, that's I don't understand it, but then once you get the hang of it, it's like, oh, that's really easy to solve for one. And then you put 2 in, and it's, that's a little bit harder. Now I got to remember first, outside, inside, last, and these, you got these things. You start introducing 3 variables and 4 variables. It doesn't, the difficulty doesn't go up in a linear fashion. The difference between solving for 2 variables and 3 is extreme. The difference between 3 and 4 is crazy. Most people could not make the leap from 2 to 3. With math training, you may be able to make the leap from 3 to 4. Beyond 4, like, you gotta have way more capability than most people do. And people don't think about this in terms of their marketing. When you throw something out to Facebook and it's, I think this is a good image, and I think this is a good message, and I think this is a good headline, and I think this is good body copy, and suddenly you've given them 4 different variables to prove out. And when it doesn't work, when the proof doesn't work, it's like, I don't know what to do here. Anyway, so we're kind of to strip it out and just get to, can we test our messaging in a naked way? Can we find the things that our customers actually want to talk about? Now, here's the really cool thing about these naked messaging tests is, 1, I can run a bunch of them at once. 2, I can run a complete test for between $2 and $5. And also, by the way, depending on how much budget I'm willing to commit to and stuff, I can usually get through multiple cycles in one day. And so I could put out, say, 10 tests and get results back on all 10 of those in one day, and figure. And statistically, I'm going to have a handful of losers. Most of them are going to be just meh. Once I get good at it, I'll have more in kind of that meh middle part of it. And then I'm going to have maybe 1 or 2 outliers on the high side. But I can kill my losers early. A loser's a loser. I can kill those, and I've spent maybe $1 or $2 on them. The middle ones, I can this is where people go wrong with Facebook. Technically, I could probably let those middle of the road ones run, and Facebook will optimize them. But I don't want to optimize the middle of the road crap. I want to kill that also. I think I mentioned last time, we have a process we call kill, chase, and graduate. I can get into the details of this if you want on it, but kill, chase, and graduate is, kill is easy. Kill is, these suck. Like they've had 200 impressions and nobody clicked on it. It's a bad message. You're not going to optimize into range on that, right? And then you'll have a whole bunch of these, like let's say that a typical ad, and this varies market to market. So let's just say a typical ad gets a 2% click-through rate or 2.5%. You can have a whole bunch of stuff that you throw out there where you're like, I'm a little bit better, I'm a little bit worse. This is another thing people get wrong with A/B testing. It's, well, this one's 2.1% and this one's 2.2%. I'm going to take the 2.2%. That's probably not statistically valid enough to really ride with that. So we have a principle in this that's called relentlessly chase the tail. That's all we care about right now, especially now with these kind of new advertising rules in this privacy-centric world. And by chasing the tail, I mean, if I throw out 20 creatives, 20 naked messages, and 5 of them are just going to suck. They're going to be bad, but I can kill them really fast. So 5 of them, and I'll only spend $5 total on those. And then I'm going to have probably 13 of them that are going to be like, they're good. Like I could probably chase those. So that, again, we've got kill, chase, or graduate. Chasing means, there's some promise there. There's something there that this one, it isn't good enough to graduate it, but maybe I can come up with another variation or 10 other variations of it given this thing that performed okay. And then 1 or 2 of them are going to be, if I'm throwing out 2 to 2.5% ads, 1 or 2 of them are suddenly going to be 4%. And it's like, oh, wow, okay. That's the one that I wanted. That's going to graduate. I'm going to do something with that because it didn't just win by a little bit. It won by a lot. It's a statistical outlier. That's what we call a tail. I want to chase. I only want to chase those tails. I want to go hard after the tails. By the way, I'm just going through this with one of my new partner businesses, and those are about the numbers that we started off in that 2 to 2.5% range, and then we got better, and 4% was the bar to cross to be a tail. And then once we started chasing those, it became 6% and then 8%. In our last round, we're throwing out 12% winners on just naked messaging, by the way. There's no other influence points in this. We have these messages now that our audience is deeply resonating with the core message. Now, again, where people get confused is then they're like, well, so how do I fit this into my funnel? You just get these message pieces. We're gonna build a funnel, or we're gonna build a product page as we go from what we learned from our naked messages. But does that kind of make sense? How I can roll through those really fast? I'm gonna make my threshold for what's worth testing. I want that to be not right now when I'm trying to think of what's a really good thing I can use as an example here. The threshold is so high that I stumble and I'm not sure, and I'm trying to come up with something really good. But really, in real life, I have that threshold so low that it's, as long as it's not like actively stupid, as long as I'm not swearing in it, as long as I'm not saying offensive things in it, then it's worth the test. Because worst case, I spend $1 and it's like, that was a terrible idea. Fine, I'm just going to move on and keep going. But because I've got 10 other things that I'm testing at the same time from that messaging standpoint. Does that make sense?
No, that definitely makes sense. And so it's sounding like the metric for a lot of it. So first of all, is this a traffic objective? Like, what's the objective of the campaign?
I'm generally running them as a traffic objective at this point. Here's the other thing that I get, that when we pull all of this together, like I could put a creative out there with puppy dogs and kitty cats, and I get a lot of clicks on it. I have to have some amount of restraint, knowing that I need to make sure that my message tests, that my creative tests are relevant to what I'm doing. Because eventually I'm going to piece all these things together and it has to work in a cohesive unit. So, but a lot of what I'm trying to do here is, I know that it's not a pure, that there may be some breakage when I reassemble these things, right? But I'm going to get this advantage of, I can run so many reps and I can move so fast that the sheer volume of what I'm going to do is going to overwhelm the breakage that will happen when I reassemble these things, when I piece this message together with this offer, with this creative going into this funnel, and so on through the line there, right? There will be breakage there.
So,
but I'm going to overcome that through just speed and volume.
This is really intriguing to me because I probably fall in the bucket of a lot more testing in the A/B side of it from an optimization and all of that. So this is a really new way of thinking for me. But I see it all. It makes sense. It makes sense why you're doing these rapid small tests. So like just from a structural standpoint. So if I had a campaign that I'm doing like my naked message test, do you have like a core audience that you select for it? Is the audience really not the biggest piece to that? Is it primarily all these different ads within it that are the prime focus?
I'm generally not trying to prove an audience out here. I go broad is basically what I do. Now that won't work for everybody, because some people have such a small niche that going broad is not where to start. But those also are probably not the people I'm generally going to be talking to. I'm trying to build scalable, what I call a CEO scale business here. I'm not trying to sell a niche item to knitters over the age of 70. And I'm not saying that's not a viable market, but in my case, I go broad. Whatever broad is for your market, do that. This is another thing that people, when you go down, the conventional wisdom is you take this niche audience and you test into the niche audience, and then you scale up from there. The problem is mathematically, and I'm not going to get into the math of it, but mathematically that doesn't hold water. So the number of times people have proved something out, and it's like, who cares? I don't care that you proved that out. You've also created your own ceiling. It's the same thing as if you start optimizing as soon as you come within range of your acquisition cost, but you're not within range on your scale, you've set a premature ceiling. And some people don't care, by the way. I want to be clear about this. If you don't care, then great. But you have not proved out your full potential. Right. And so you've got to keep in mind those different parts of it. So in this case, I am almost always I'm almost always playing in spaces where I'm trying to build at least an 8-figure brand. And in that case, go broad. If that's not the case, if you are inherently smaller, let's say that it's a digital course and it's based on your knowledge and your audience just isn't that big. Great. Pick whatever the biggest version of your audience is. I am not a believer in prove it small and scale up, because too many times what you prove small doesn't scale up. You're almost always better off proving big and trimming back, which is what, by the way, what will happen here. We have a process. What we're talking about right now is what we call the seed stage. The seed stage is, let's figure out which of these seeds, if we plant them, which of these seeds will grow fast, okay? Because speed is important. It's not the only thing, but planting a seed that isn't going to come to fruition for a decade, that's viable in some scenarios. For most small businesses, that is not viable. For most small businesses, I need to know what's going to pop its head above the ground tomorrow. And so the first thing is find the seeds that will grow, given the environment that we have. The next thing is we splinter. And splintering is where we start breaking down that, okay, given that this message works, the splintering is where we start finding the affinity groups of, all right, broadly, this message works. Broadly, this concept of artisanal, fresh coffee works. Now we're going to start. Now we can splinter that out to, hey, this was grown in the altitudes of the mountains of Peru, and here's why in that low oxygen environment, here's what happens to your coffee bean. There's a market for that that's still about the freshness and the artisanal quality of it, right? So you're going to splinter off, and it's an optimization. But splintering is an optimization. This is why it's important to understand this. Is it exploration or is it exploitation? Splintering is exploiting. So if you start off with the exploiting, you're going to cap your market at that. The number of people who care about the altitude of the mountains in Peru, which, by the way, I don't even know if that's a thing, but let's say that it is. To be able to tell that story, you've got to hang that off of the core message that then you can splinter out. And when you splinter it out, that's when you get these conversion rates that might go from a 6% to a 10%, because now your splinter has a high affinity. I've actually got, you know what, I know that you'll have a link for this afterwards. I have a sheet that I go through that talks about, like, if you're talking about design elements on your funnel or on your product detail page, design element is inherently an optimization. It is never beyond just clarity. It's never exploration. It's always exploitation, right? So if you're talking about, gosh, should I make my button blue or green or orange? Stop. It doesn't matter at this stage. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm saying you're out of sequence. You're spending time, you're spending resources on something that doesn't get you where you need to be, right? So when you're thinking in those terms, that's automatically an optimization. When you're thinking in terms of which word is better, that's automatically an optimization. So anyway, I've got this whole list of, if this is the element that you're looking at, it's probably an optimization, or it's probably a discovery-oriented thing. And when it's just a worksheet of when to lean discovery-heavy and when to lean optimization-heavy on it. Because there is, oh man, I hope this isn't over the head of people. When you can think about it like this, when you can break it down, one, it's going to make, when things don't work, part of testing is when something doesn't work, figuring out why that didn't work and what can I test next. It's the debugging process. I'm trying to create something that, one, lets me test very rapidly, but that also gives me a lot of clarity when it comes to why is something not working, where I can immediately bookend, it's between here and here that it's not working. It's not just between they clicked and they bought, which is where most people are at. It's like, why isn't it working? Tell me what the spot is that doesn't work. It's like, I don't know, it just doesn't work. And they redo their whole funnel, or they redo their offer, and it's like, this guy's only 12% of the people are seeing your offer, but you're off by 40%. That cannot mathematically be what it is, right? So anyway, trying to make this easier to debug and all this other stuff, but where to focus is a big deal on this. Are you discovery heavy? Are you optimization heavy? And most people, by the way, by a long shot, probably 95% of businesses, of e-commerce businesses specifically, should be right now discovery heavy. Just because that's where the economy is, where the platforms are and everything else. Unless you've got a really vibrant, high profit business already, then you go optimization heavy. But most businesses should be discovery heavy right now.
So when you say discovery heavy, you're referring to like identifying, bookending, finding those incremental pieces that could all piece together that would allow you to get into the optimization?
Well, with my big exception to that being incremental, the whole point of this is that we're not trying to be incremental. Incrementality does not get us where we need to be.
Okay.
So we'll pick up incremental gains, by the way. That's the beauty of this. We're going to get the incremental gains also. We're going to get better at our core messaging regardless, because we're going to get a lot of reps in there. The other example I use a lot, Malcolm Gladwell made that 10,000 hours thing famous, that people who are in these performance fields, when they get the 10,000 hours in, then they're experts. In our case with Facebook ads, I don't think it's 10,000 hours. I think it's 10,000 tries. And that obviously is an extreme number, but the point being, when you can really ramp up, if you're only getting 10 tries in right now, what if you could make that 100? You're going to get that much more learning out of it. And some of it will be incremental. But I'm telling you right now, the game that we're playing isn't the incremental gains. The game that we're playing is, can I jump from a 2.5% click-through rate to a 4% to a 6% to a 12%? The game that I'm playing is, when I throw out a naked offer, so now the naked offer is, if I could shave 3 strokes off of your golf game in the next 3 rounds without spending a bunch of money on, professional training, whatever it is, would you take me up on that? Some version of that. There's literally, it's just this naked offer that all I'm testing is, if I could do this for you, would you have a conversation with me? And seeing the offers where people say, that's intriguing to me. Yeah, I would do that. And then kind of building that out. But again, what I'm looking for is not that's incrementally better than this other one. What I'm looking for is that, given enough iterations, given enough reps of doing that, I'm going to find the one that absolutely just breaks the bank. I'm going to find the one that goes from, okay, that offer, 4% of the people like it. This one's 4.2. This one's 4.1. This one's 3.5. Oh, this one's 7. Okay, that's the one that right now I'm going to peel off, and I'm going to kind of start testing around that. But you've got to have a process that lets you get through. If it's naked messaging, you've got to have a process that lets you get through dozens of these at a time. If they're naked offers are a little bit slower, but again, something where you can get through a dozen of them at a time. When you get down into the conversational part of this, the content part of it, what we call a sandbox, I drew this out for you. The way that it breaks down is, the higher up the funnel, the faster your test should be. They should be fast, both from how long it takes you to set them up, so set them up, tear them down, run them fast from a standpoint of the actual labor required, everything else, and inexpensive from a standpoint of the resources you're committing to it. When you drop a level down in your funnel, and now you're post-click, now you should, let's say if that first level of things, you should be able to run a test for between $2 and $5, and also for between 2 and 5 hours. So here, these aren't hard and fast rules. They're more just kind of rules of thumb. But at that first level, and again, admittedly, at least a part of this is just to make it simple for my team to understand. 2 to 5 is the number. It's $2 to $5 that should be able to complete the test within 2 to 5 hours, and it shouldn't take you any longer than 2 to 5 minutes to actually set up the test. Okay, so you can't have a $2 test that takes you an hour to set up. You're completely out of whack. And it's not going to be worth it, right? What makes a $2 test worth it is that I can run a whole bunch of them at once. Then I get to the post-click part of it. And the post-click part of it, the numbers change. I make it easy. I just multiply everything basically by one factor. So now the test is going to be a $20 to $50 test, right? That shouldn't take me any longer than 2 to 5 hours to set up, and that I should be able to have all the results back on it in 2 to 5 days. And we're actually faster on all of those things than that. But that just kind of gives me, again, if you're talking about building out a new video sales letter or a new funnel or something along those lines, and you're thinking, okay, it's going to take me 3 days to get this done, you got to slot that appropriately in your experimentation framework. That's going to be further down the line. And again, maybe worthwhile to run. I'm not saying it's not, but if you don't have some high frequency, so we have high frequency and high threshold. High threshold being, I'm not going to get a lot of reps on it. It takes either a particular skill set, a particular resource, money, time, whatever. I'm only going to get a few number of shots of those, which means I need to make those I need to get my win probability as high as possible on those. Meaning I can't have a bunch of assumptions in there. I can't have untested messaging go into a high threshold test. I can't have an untested offer go into a high threshold test because it's going to invalidate. It's going to break that test. Again, cross your fingers that the test works, but when it doesn't, and I do say when, not if, when it doesn't work, you're hosed if you've got those untested elements in there because now you got to start over, right? So So you still get to those high threshold tests. It's just that you feed and inform those with these high frequency tests. These tests where you get a lot of reps and a lot of opportunities. And each time you learn something, you have kind of filtered into the next test and filtered into the next test, so that by the time you're running a full funnel test, you're basically all that you're proving is, can I assemble these parts? And how much breakage am I going to have when I reassemble them? But you're not trying to prove out, is this a good message? You're not trying to prove out, is this a feature or a benefit that my people like? You're not trying to prove out, is this the right offer? Should I be running a free plus shipping? Should I be running what should I have in my offer stack? And what kind of benefits should I have? You know all of that stuff already. You've got all the things that were statistical outliers that feed this. And by the way, now, like, if you look at a really good video sales letter that might cost $100,000 to really do it right, like, you'd be a moron to do that on day one, because the chances are, even if you hire all the right skilled people, you're going to miss stuff on it, right? And that becomes this existential, gosh, I'm going to write a $100,000 check, and I sure as heck hope that it works. But I'll write that check all day long when what I'm feeding them is, here's the messaging that I know works. Here's what my audience responds to. Here are the splinters that we've got, that we've proven out. Here's the offers that we know work. And now you're just letting somebody take their skill, and you're letting somebody just run with, hey, I got really high video production skills, or I've got really high copy skills, or whatever else. That's what you're laying right on top of. You're not bringing all this mystery in with you. You're not asking for multiple proofs in the process. Does that make sense? I hope, again.
So my mind's going like a million miles an hour because I have all these things of like the things that I kind of want to test and do. And I really, really like this. So like, what are those keys? So you mentioned message and offer, but like, what are those elements that you want to see proven in that, high or low threshold, like really pumping them out, high frequency of that? What are the elements you want? So two parts of the question. Number one, what are those elements you want to validate essentially before moving to another stage? And how many of each of those do you want before moving to that other stage?
Okay. All right. So we have really big picture. We have a 4-tier process through the funnel. And even if you're not using like funnels and sales pages stuff, even if you're just using product detail pages, the concept is the same. So at the top, you've got just your big, broad, your potential audience, right? So up there, we're looking for engagement. And that's so the tests that we've been talking about so far, these messaging tests, naked messages, we call them flash tests. At that level, I've already been through kind of the spend parameters and those, but that's the first level, which is the engagement level. And then from there, we go from engagement to consumption. And consumption means, so it's one thing to, did somebody click on it? Now at the consumption stage, it's what will they actually consume? What are they interested enough that if they only have, we hear a lot in today's day and age that, people have maybe an 8-second attention span, and it seems to be decreasing, and based on every evidence I've seen, it is decreasing. And so it's one thing to capture that initial, what's the interruption, especially on Facebook, on TikTok, on YouTube, less so on search, but where they've got intent and they're pulling things into their space. But in this case, we're pushing something into their space. What's the interruption that they'll engage with? So that's the first level of testing. But then the consumption part of it is the next level, which is, can we break through that 8-second barrier? Can we actually get people make a mistake here, by the way, thinking that everything at this point has to be quick cut videos and you've only got 8 seconds in each phase of a video. That's not true. At this phase, if you can't hold their attention, you've not earned the right to, you're probably not going to get a sale. You've got to find the thing that when you say, hey, so I brought you in with this, with this teaser about the altitude, what's the altitude doing for your coffee, or what was the pick date for your coffee or something like that. Whole different story if they go in there and you start to talk to them about it and they're like, I don't actually care about this stuff. And they bounce. That is literally the definition of bounce. And so now we're trying to test, will they consume this content? And we're going to break the content down usually into either small videos, or quizzes are great for this. or micro pieces of content, sometimes even curated content. So I might just do a YouTube video. There's a great YouTube video out there. Great thing about things like YouTube and TikTok and Twitter, anything that's embeddable is you've already got the permission to embed them. And so to have something like that out there and just to test, all that I'm testing now is not will they convert yet. I'm just testing, will they hold this conversation? Will they consume this content if I put it in front of them? Because eventually when I build my sales page, I need each element to pull them further down each page of the sales process. I also need to have some idea of priority of, wow, if I lead with this story about this picker in the altitude of Peru and what this does in his company. If I know that that's a high consumption story, I know that I want to place that high up ultimately in my sales process as well, in my funnel or on my product detail page or whatever that might look like. Does that kind of make sense to you?
Yeah. So what's that metric for consumption that you use? So is it 8-second barrier, and where is that measured? Where do you measure that at?
Okay, so this is going to be post-click, and I no longer care about the 8 seconds. The 8 seconds was the engagement part. If they didn't engage with me, then I'm already past that. Okay, so now it's consumption, and I have a couple of ways of doing this. The most common, if you got a video, most of the video platforms now, you can't do this if you're embedding somebody else's YouTube video. Then you have to use some other proxy metrics. But if you got a video and your video is hosted, I don't know all the platforms, but I know the ones that I use, which is going to be on, Wistia and I think even YouTube, all these places. You can see where are people dropping off, how am I capturing their attention. That's called a Weibull something function chart. Weibull hazard function, which we know that internally because we pay attention to our Weibull hazards, which is where are people dropping off and trying to figure out why are they dropping off. But I can see pretty clearly on a video, are they consuming this video or are they not consuming this video? I can see where they're losing interest. You're going to have a steep drop off. You know that's just the pattern of it, but you want to extend that. You want to extend that drop off out as far as possible. If it's text-based content, then I've usually got in JavaScript I'm not getting the technical side of this. I could because I'm a technical guy, but usually I'm just popping for either page depth or for when particular elements are shown. So if I've got a call to action, for example, I might instrument how often does that thing get shown, and again I'm looking for outliers. So I'm looking for the times where if in general 25% of the people consume 75% of the page, I'm looking for, well, what's the piece of content where suddenly that jumps to 50 or 60%? Right?
Do you ever use like heat mapping for things like that?
I use heat maps all the time for stuff like that. Yes. So if you're looking for a single metric, then the equivalent to the heat map is just the depth of page on there or time on page. Time on page is okay also, except for on desktop, sometimes people pull it up and then it just sits there. On mobile, time on page is usually a pretty good representative.
So what would you say for like
are a good one too?
What would you say for like a product, like just coffee product display page? Like what kind of elements would you look for on there, or what kind of outliers?
Percentage wise?
Or like if you were driving traffic to like if I sold coffee
Yep.
and the traffic was driven to the actual product page, what are those kind of things you might use in there? Would you use video in there? What if they didn't have the video?
So here's something that I really believe in. So I'm going to come all the way back to the creative testing. When I'm doing messaging, I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible. But I know that eventually when I run a creative, an actual production creative, I want to have at least 2 creatives in there because I need a static image and I need a video. And the reason for that is Facebook knows algorithmically that different people prefer different modalities. So it's not, people always look at this like, which one's going to perform better and then let's kill the loser. No, your image, your static image is getting people that your video won't. And your video is getting people your static image won't. So really, you let both of them run and let Facebook's algorithm determine what they're going to show to whom. Does that kind of make sense so far? That concept of modalities is meaningful. And it's the same thing at this level, only we're the ones that have to control the modalities. Meaning, some people are going to respond well to a quiz. Some people are going to respond well to written content. And it's going to depend on their age and their demographics and all these other things. Some people are going to respond well to videos and not at all to written word. So where you want to be testing out as many modalities as you can. And a modality means an actual presentation mechanism. Video is a modality. Text is a modality. Quiz is a modality. So and each of those is going to have its own is going to have its own consumption metrics on it. I don't want to make I'm trying not to make this hard. This isn't hard, but it's different. So here's what we do. We establish early on, everybody's familiar with like the bell curve, right? Which is called a normal distribution. And most things are going to have a normal distribution. And it doesn't take very much traffic to figure out what your normal distribution is. And so usually we're throwing stuff out. We have like rough rules of thumb. They're easier on that very front end, the on-platform side of things. For I can usually tell you, like, look, you don't need to have 1,000 impressions and no clicks to know that it ain't going to work. So we've got some easier ones there. Like if you've got 200 impressions and you don't have any clicks, you can kill that thing. If you're getting clicks to it, but your clicks are costing you $2 a piece, you can kill that thing. I really don't care what market you're in. That's not going to be viable. Post-click, it's a little bit different. So we usually set up our own. We figure out what the standard distribution is, which is way easier than it sounds, by the way. We figure out what our standard distribution is, and then we just start trying all the different modalities. And if we find a message that, let's say that it works, the easiest one to create is either going to be curated content, meaning I just go find a YouTube video that's already got 3 million views, which means I know that people like this video. So I'll embed that, and then I'll put some commentary on it, right? That's pretty easy to do. Also, basic text is easy to do, especially when you're using AI. We use a lot of AI stuff like Jasper and some of our own tools right now too, where we can come up with basic text pretty easily. And then and by the way, I apologize. I've got my cleaning ladies are here right now, so if you hear vacuuming and stuff outside my door.
Oh, you're all right.
Okay. So we'll set up something fast and easy. Speed is important here. Speed is very important. By the way, quality is minimally important. It's got to follow that same rule of it can't be actively bad. It can't sound like it was written by a robot. It can't sound like it was written by, in my case, English speaking. It can't sound like it was written by a non-native English speaker. It can't be bad, but neither does it need to be great. The only things that need to be great are the things that eventually we'll get the metrics on it that will say, hey, chase that, make that one better, build that out, try a different, if the text version or if the YouTube version of this works, the curated version, YouTube and some commentary, if that works and people seem to be consuming that and you get a long time on page or they're getting, they're scrolling down and reading things, whatever, graduate that up and try an internal video of that. Try and up the value or the presentation of that content. Try it as a quiz. So you're kind of you're trying to lower that threshold of what can I throw out there to just get some metrics that are meaningful metrics. But as soon as anything pops its head above, then you chase it. Now you're back to kill, chase, and graduate. So how you chase at this level is try different modalities. Try it as video. Try it as I still wouldn't put a lot of production value into the video, meaning just time and effort. But could you do certain things? Could you run a couple of different YouTube tests and see which one gets greater? You try a longer form, try a shorter form. There's a lot of ways that you can splinter that out now and chase it. And then again, what you're really looking for are every once in a while you're going to get both a modality and a piece of content. So it's like, wow, this particular video or this particular piece of content just went through the roof. The consumption that we're getting on it, it's not 5% better. It's 200, 300, 4%, 400% better than the other pieces in that same kind of, in that bucket. It broke on that bell curve, on that standard distribution. We're out at one of the tails. And that's when it's time to graduate, by the way. You asked when it's time to move on. It's time to move on when you have tails that you can pursue. If you don't have tails to pursue, it's not time to move on. And by the way, those first two levels should always be running. You should always be having these low threshold messaging tests going out there and these low threshold consumption tests going out there.
So are you testing engagement and then where they're going has the consumption on it? So do they both test simultaneously?
They can, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not afraid, by the way, on the engagement of just sending them. I'll send clicks off to competitors and all kinds of stuff because if I'm really early in the process, meaning I don't have a funnel built out yet. Sometimes I often don't even know what my product is. But the less you have assumed, the better off you are. Which means in my case, I'm going to go all the way to first principles, and I don't know my audience, and I don't know my product, and I got to start with a market of some sort. But I try and have as little gravity as possible in that. But for most people who already have a product, maybe you have a sales page, great, just run it to your sales page. It may not be congruent, but you can get the numbers that you want to test and then just kill the test and move on. But I'm not above, if I'm testing engagement, that first part of it, then I got no problem running the traffic to a competitor. I don't care. I just care about the on-platform numbers, and I'm only going to run it for a little bit of time, or running it to, if it's a concept, I might run it to a Starbucks page or a USA Today article, whatever. I'm all I care about is, can I get the engagement, and only things that deserve getting the next step, get the next step. This is another reason why I can test way faster, because I'm not worried about, I have to have the whole thing top to bottom, merchanting, products, fulfillment. I got to have all that stuff figured out. I have to test everything before I can test anything. That is a false choice, and it is damaging to people. So that may not answer your question, but the answer really is, it depends. Once I have assets built, then I'll run to my own assets. But before that, I'm always looking for, is there a way that I can do this without having to build that particular asset at a time when I'm not ready? The numbers have not told me yet it's time to build that particular asset.
So if you have run the engagement, you've proven the consumption. Let's just say I am running to a product page for my coffee. People are scrolling all the way down. We have that stuff fine tuned, or we have some of those winning like outliers identified. Like, what's that third level down out of the 4?
So then we need to measure intent, and intent in our case, there are 2 different paths that people can go with their intent. And one of them is what we call, they're both loops, by the way. So one of them we call a consumption loop. And a consumption loop means that, let's say that somebody is drinking Starbucks coffee right now, and what you know about them then is they're willing to pay a premium price, but they are probably consuming a crappy product, right? So so maybe there's an education component. So a consumption loop means that at the end of consuming one piece of content, the next best thing for them to do in order to convert, because they're new to this process, maybe they've never had true artisanal coffee, right? And so the next thing might be, well, how would you select a coffee, which is another consumption element. You're going to refer them back up to another piece of content that you have, right? And that's valid. You want to control that process. They're not ready. If you said right then, hey, I got a $27 bag of coffee, I don't know what prices would be, but I got a $27 bag of coffee. You don't want to lose them when they would consume more content. So I have a process that I go through of what has to prove true in order for them to buy from me. And so there's a certain amount of knowledge that if they're going to buy your artisanal coffee, you might go through and say, well, man, like if they understood this and this and like these 4 points, then they would probably buy my coffee. But if they only understand one of them, they probably won't buy my coffee, right? So you want to give them opportunities to get it. And eventually, by the way, you may have this all in one drop-down funnel. You may have each of these pieces in succession that pulls them through this. But that's a valid behavior for them to go through and essentially say, you tell them something, and they essentially go, that's interesting. Tell me more, right? That's totally valid. It doesn't mean that they're not a potential customer or anything else. It literally is, tell me more. You might have trust elements that you've got to get over. You may have knowledge elements that you've got to get over. But bottom line is, there's something on your list of what has to prove true that isn't there yet. You hope that they come through with just one missing piece, that you fill in that missing piece and they're ready to go. But statistically, that's not what happens, right? So you've got a consumption loop is one intention they can have. The other intention is an action loop. And the action loop is, I'm ready to take action on this. And it's a loop, by the way, because usually once they've bought one thing, if you've done this effectively, you get them in a loop where you can continue to buy, where whether it's bumps or upsells or whatever it might be, you've got some window in which they're primed to take action. And as much action as you can get them to take in that window, you want them to take. And by the way, this is also where it's like, get out of the way at this point. Don't give them any more stuff to consume. When they're ready for this and they've indicated that they are, then you let them move on. But that's the next measurement piece here is what's their intent? And do they have an intent? Because if they don't, if they just consumed it and they don't want to consume more and they don't want to take action, then that tells you something about the content that you've got. It's not good preparatory content. It's not leading them anywhere. So even if they're consuming it, if it's not driving them to either consume more or to take action, and by the way, take action, this is the first time that we introduce offers. So taking action is usually where you're going to start introducing, if I could do X for you without Y, would you do that? And that also means that we've done some preparatory testing. We test those naked offers independent of this particular process. So when they get down to this, we know what it is that they have been primed. We know what they are already inclined to react to in terms of, are they inclined to react to 2-for-1s? Are they inclined to react to free plus shipping? Are they inclined to react to a value stack? Are they inclined to react to, USA made? Whatever it is, we know the value propositions that are important to them at this point.
So when you're running so when you're running intent, are you at this point running for conversion at all? Or
yes.
No?
So this is the first time that we switch over to the objective is going to be a conversion objective. We're still not optimizing. We don't optimize. So the last stage is optimization, by the way. The last stage now is it's conversion, and that's what we care about. And only once we've got through that phase of it, there's actually a parallel structure to this that is about now taking what we've learned and scaling it and growing it and doing more of that, optimizing for the algorithm, for reach, those sorts of things. So you drop down through the funnel, you prove each of these things, and you get down to your conversion proof, and you've got. And again, you're likely now, if the typical website comes through, you're really only getting. I can't remember if I talked about this last time or not, but there's this audience spectrum from hell no's to hell yeses, and the hell yeses are a small percentage, but most sales pages, most product pages only capture those people. They only capture the people that are like one thing away from being there. And you're sometimes like your order page can break, and these are the people who email you and call you. It's like, I'm trying to buy your thing and I can't, it's not working for me. And like you almost have to offend them to not get them to buy. Most people capture that, and then just a little bit more of people who they're solid yeses, right? But they don't do really anything to capture there's a whole bunch of skeptical yeses and people who want to believe, but they've been burned. There's all kinds of reasons why people don't. But that is the meat of the market, by the way, are those other people. The meat of the market, if 2% of people, if 1% of people, usually 1 or 2% are hell yeses, and then usually about 2 to maybe 4 to 5% are solid yeses. Those are easy. That's low hanging fruit. But the full market of people who click on your ads, and again, there's a part of it, I don't know why people click on the ads. These are the people that complain to Facebook that an ad showed up in their feed and whatever else. But you can usually get all the way out to about 35%, maybe, and in some markets even higher than that if you've done the rest of it right. But we're trying to open up to that's the conversion audience we want to play in. We want to open up. It's not, can we go from a 2% to a 3% conversion rate? That's great. By the way, that's also a 50% jump. That's a big jump. That's a huge jump. But we're trying to go from, can we go from 2% to 6% to 8% to 12%? We're trying to get those really big multiples. We'll take the incremental gains as we go, but we're playing to chase those tails. We're playing to chase the numbers that they literally break the curve. And when all of this comes together down at the bottom, we start optimizing for conversion. Now we can come back up to the top of the funnel and start optimizing for reach and start optimizing for lifetime values and we've kind of got this sister process. We won't get into it today, but that first part is about let's get your business solid. Let's get it selling at a really good clip and make sure that you really understand what works and what doesn't work. And then we're going to feed that back into this process with a little bit different intent now. Now we can have everything be conversion optimized, by the way. But now we're going to be focusing on, can we get really good a really good distribution match with the algorithm? Meaning, can we now start tweaking it? The first pass through was about tweaking for people. The second pass through is about tweaking for process and for the algorithm. And you're going to get another, again, like 200, 300% bump when you start optimizing for the process and the algorithm side of it. But when you try and mix all that together, which is what most people do, is I hope that people buy this, and I hope the algorithm likes it, and I hope that the conversion process works, and I hope the messaging is good, and they throw all this into one thing, and one thing cannot work and break it down, and they're just like, I don't know, this must be a bad product. I got to move on to something else, or I don't know what to test, or I'm going to start testing my headline when it had nothing to do with the headline that was the breakdown process in it.
So that's where those are the people that are saying, they say Facebook ads don't work.
Yep.
They throw in the towel real fast because it sounds like they put all their eggs in that one thing or two things, and then and like you said before, like then you're looking at like $2,000 to $5,000 in spend, just barely even touch the surface of what's working.
Right, and then you can't even
process.
scale from there. So you got something where it's like, I made some money. Like I didn't lose my shorts on that. And by the way, that for a lot of people, that's like the best case scenario on Facebook right now is I actually sold something. I didn't lose my shorts on it, but I can't go anywhere with it either. You know, I have this thing that I can scale it up and take it with it to a take-home profit of $4,000 a month, which is not. That ain't what I told my wife was going to happen with this thing. You know, I told her we were going on vacations and stuff, and now I just don't have a solid enough foundation, which is really what this is about. It's the reason why we put so much time and effort into experimentation up front is to give us this really solid foundation. You have to be, in this day and age, post iOS 14.5, but also just with all the competition, how easy it is for people to start up these businesses and stuff. You used to just be able to throw out there, just showing up was enough. You have to, you got to be an outlier somewhere in this day and age. It's really hard to be an outlier from an innovation standpoint. That means you got to invent something new. This is another mistake people make is like, oh, there's somebody already selling it. You guys, I was selling 9 figures a year of stuff that it wasn't unique stuff. And it's the same stuff I've been selling for 4 years, which means it wasn't stuff where every 6 months I got to find the next fidget spinner or whatever else. So it's hard and it's expensive if you have to be innovative, if you have to be new and inventive and all of these and sexy. Like it's not hard to sell sexy, but it's hard to be sexy. It's really hard to be sexy. So it's how do we take things where we're probably not going to be world class in a lot of these areas, but we can't be middle class in all of them. Does that make sense? Which means we've really got to experiment a lot with where are we going to find the places where we can be an outlier, where we can be exceptional, and let's build off of that base. That's a base that gives us some margin for error. It gives us some wiggle room, some room to move. I always take that room to move in scale, meaning when I get those bumps, to me it means excellent. Now I can sell 10% more and take all that extra revenue. But you could also just take it home. It could just be, man, I got that 10% extra there, and I'm just going to put it in my pocket. And I'm going to, you know, I'm going on vacation for a month next week. That's sometimes what it is just like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm leaving. I'm gone for a month because I built my business off of chasing tails, off of a really solid foundation. And then when something does break, I can usually identify right exactly where it is. The time that it takes me to troubleshoot and get back on track is like minuscule compared to, I see a lot of business owners that spend months. That when all this Facebook crap hit, they've spent months just going in circles. And by the way, trying like the same thing, just there's a point where harder, better, faster, where grinding it out is valuable. It's not times like these. Harder, better, faster, if something that doesn't work, doesn't make it work, right? It just makes you lose your mind faster, lose your money faster, and everything else. You want to build up a foundation that gives you enough wiggle room that when the next thing does happen, that you can say, cool, I'm at least I'm solid. I might have to figure something out again, but I know right where the breakdown is. I know right where it is that I need to experiment. And I've got a framework for rapidly experimenting in that area. The deeper down you go, the slower the experiments are, which means most of that framework, the effort in that framework is going to be kind of higher up. But when you can get really fast at that, there's a tremendous amount of value to that. In fact, I would say it's almost hard to screw it up when you get that many tries. I don't think I could hit a Major League Baseball pitch. I would not be very successful. But if you give me 1,000 at-bats, I'm probably going to hit one of them, right?
Yeah.
But I'm going to need the 1,000 at-bats for sure to make that happen. And that's a really low probability thing, but that is how it works. Anyway, it's a good framework. I happen to believe that right now that moving towards that experimentation side of things as opposed to the optimization side of things is the best answer for how do we get around what's happening on the Facebook platform right now. And Facebook, by the way, still is a great platform. When you give it a single variable proof, it's still the best platform around. There's no question about it. it can't do it as well when you give it 3, 4, 5 variables to prove anymore. It used to be able to. They made it look easy enough that I think we forgot how hard all that math is that they were doing. And it is exceptionally hard. But when we can kind of explicitly prove those things first and then feed them into Facebook, we put ourselves into a much better position to not just succeed, but to succeed at a high level. This is having now the business that you actually want, not the business where it's kind of what you'll settle for.
Wow. I think that's a wonderful note to kind of end on, Matt. You've probably broken. I think this is the record now for I've always wanted to do a 2-hour like Joe Rogan style podcast, and I feel like I could totally hit that. But I want to respect your time.
Oh, holy crap!
And
I like doing this. That's the good news.
This is amazing. I do want to ask: is there any way that you have a cheat sheet or something like this that we could direct people to that are listening and like, hey, how do I look at a drawing of this? Because I've been sketching this out as we've been going. I know you've sketched it for me.
Yeah, if you come up with a link, Josh, I know that last time you said that you would have a link from your I don't remember what you said, e-commerce, whatever.
We'll go to alleypodcast.com/Matt.
Okay.
/Matt. You took the first Matt name on here, so
okay, cool.
That's it.
So you do that, and I'll at least throw some cheat sheets out there. And then if we have some, I've got some like low level as I work with partners of mine and stuff where I teach them some of these things. I probably got some videos and things I could put out there too, but I can at least get some of these cheat sheets and some of our so here's the 2 things I can commit to. I've got a spreadsheet that you basically say where you at in the process of your business, where you at in your business, and what's your advertising budget, and it will give you the range for here's how much you should be spending on tests, on experimenting, and how many experiments you should be running, and how much you should be spending on them, because most people are way off on that, by the way, way off. Then I've got some other things that will just help them figure out what kind of tests they should be running, and then the easiest thing is I can come up with a pretty complete just cheat sheet on when you're running these high frequency, low threshold, naked messaging tests and naked offer tests and the initial creative things. That's a pretty well defined process for what the metrics you're looking at and how you measure those things and stuff. I can come up with some good cheat sheets on all those.
Awesome. So that works. So anyone go to alleypodcast.com/Matt. We'll forward it to a link, or we'll just have that on our website somewhere to make sure they can access that, Matt.
Yep.
Man, thank you for being on. I really appreciate it. For everybody else, you've been listening to the Ecommerce Alley podcast, hosted by myself and Matt. We can't thank you enough for listening to this session, produced by the legendary Dylan Counts. Of course, all the work behind the scenes. And so we want to say thank you. And we are grateful that you are our listener. We'll see you in the next episode.